Hi, I'm Marcus. My wife's sister told everyone I'd never amount to anything. Said I was just another dreamer with empty pockets and big ideas. She laughed when I quit my corporate job to start my own business. Called me a fool when I moved us into a smaller apartment to save money. But standing at the entrance of Willowbrook Country Club last Saturday night, watching her jaw drop as I handed the valet my keys, I wasn't just a member anymore. I owned the place. And the look on her face when she realized it was worth every sleepless night, every rejected loan application, every doubt that had ever crossed my mind. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Let me take you back to where it all started. 5 years ago, I was Marcus Chen, a 32-year-old financial analyst at Morrison & Associates, pulling down a decent salary but feeling like my soul was slowly being drained through a corporate straw. Every morning, I'd wake up in our cramped studio apartment, kiss my wife Sarah goodbye, and trudge through another day of spreadsheets and meaningless meetings. The work wasn't terrible, but it wasn't me either. I'd always dreamed of running my own business, maybe something in hospitality or real estate, but dreams don't pay the bills, and Sarah's family never let me forget it. Sarah's older sister, Rebecca, was everything I wasn't. She'd married young to a successful surgeon named Dr. James Whitfield, lived in a sprawling colonial in the suburbs, and had never worked a day outside of their pristine home. Rebecca had this way of looking at me like I was something she'd stepped in on her way to somewhere important. During family dinners, she'd lean back in her chair with that practiced smile and ask questions designed to remind everyone exactly where I stood on the social ladder. The first time I met Rebecca was at Sarah's birthday party 3 years into our marriage. Sarah had warned me about her sister's sharp tongue, but nothing could have prepared me for the surgical precision with which Rebecca dismantled people's confidence. She waited until I was alone in the kitchen, refilling my coffee cup, before she struck. "So Marcus," she said, her voice honeyed with false sweetness, "still playing accountant at that little firm downtown?" The way she said little firm made it sound like I was running a lemonade stand. I corrected her gently, explaining that I was a senior financial analyst, but she waved my words away like smoke. "Oh, that's nice. James always says those corporate positions are so temporary these days. No real security, you know? Not like having your own practice." I should have walked away then, but something in her tone made me want to defend myself. "Actually, I've been thinking about starting my own consulting business. I have some ideas about." "Oh, how wonderful!" Rebecca interrupted, clapping her hands together like I'd just told her I wanted to become a circus performer. Another dreamer. Well, we all need our little fantasies, don't we? Sarah's so patient with you. That last comment hit like a physical blow. The implication that my wife was somehow settling for me, tolerating my ambitions out of pity, burned in my chest for weeks afterward. But Rebecca wasn't done. Over the months that followed, she made it her mission to remind me of my place in the family hierarchy at every gathering. During Thanksgiving dinner that year, she asked loudly across the table whether I'd gotten that promotion thing I'd mentioned. When I explained that I'd actually been considering leaving to start my own firm, she laughed so hard she snorted wine through her nose. "Oh Marcus, you're so funny. Sarah, you didn't tell me your husband was a comedian." The worst part wasn't Rebecca's cruelty, it was the way everyone else just sat there, uncomfortable but silent. Sarah would squeeze my hand under the table, a gesture that was supposed to be supportive but somehow made me feel smaller. Her parents would change the subject quickly, as if my dreams were an embarrassment to be glossed over. Even Sarah's younger brother Tommy, who'd always been friendly to me, would suddenly find his plate fascinating whenever Rebecca started her attacks. The breaking point came during a family barbecue last summer. I'd finally worked up the courage to tell Sarah about my business plan. I'd been developing a concept for a boutique hospitality consulting firm, specializing in helping struggling restaurants and hotels optimize their operations. I'd done months of research, created detailed financial projections, and even had preliminary conversations with a few potential clients. I was passionate about it in a way I'd never been passionate about anything before. Sarah had been supportive when I'd explained everything to her privately, but I could see the worry in her eyes. The plan required us to live off our savings for at least 6 months while I got the business off the ground. We'd have to move to a smaller place, cut back on expenses, and take a real financial risk. It wasn't easy for either of us, but Sarah said she believed in me, and that meant everything. At the barbecue, Rebecca cornered me by the pool while everyone else was inside getting dessert. She'd had a few glasses of wine and her usual filter was completely gone. "So I hear you're planning to quit your job," she said, not bothering with her usual false sweetness. "Sarah told me about your little restaurant scheme." "It's a hospitality consulting business," I corrected, but she rolled her eyes. "Oh please, Marcus. Let's be honest here. You're 33 years old, you've never run a business, you have no relevant experience, and you want my sister to bankroll your midlife crisis. Do you have any idea how selfish that is?" I felt my face flush red. "It's not a midlife crisis, Rebecca. I've done extensive research, I have a solid business plan, and you have what, exactly? A dream? Some spreadsheets? Marcus, I've seen dozens of men like you come through James's practice. Guys who think they're entrepreneurs but are really just afraid of real work. You know what they all have in common? They fail. Every single one of them." Her words hit me like ice water. Not because I believed them, but because I could see how much she enjoyed saying them. There was a gleam in her eyes, the satisfaction of a predator who'd found the perfect spot to sink her teeth in. "Sarah deserves better than this," she continued. "She deserves security, stability. She deserves a man who can actually provide for her, not someone who's going to drag her down with his fantasies." I was about to respond when Sarah appeared at the sliding door, calling my name. Rebecca immediately switched back to her sweet voice, telling Sarah how nice it was that I was exploring my options. But the damage was done. That night, lying in bed next to Sarah, I found myself wondering if Rebecca was right. Maybe I was being selfish. Maybe I was asking too much of the woman I loved. But then I remembered why I'd fallen in love with Sarah in the first place. We'd met at a coffee shop near my office, both of us hiding from a sudden rainstorm. She was reading a travel magazine, planning a trip to Thailand she'd been saving for. When I asked her about it, her eyes lit up as she described all the places she wanted to see, the experiences she wanted to have. She wasn't afraid of taking risks back then. She wasn't afraid of dreaming. That's when I realized that Rebecca's real target wasn't just me, it was the part of Sarah that still believed in possibilities. Rebecca had married for security and status, and she couldn't stand the idea that her younger sister might choose love and adventure instead. Every cruel comment about my prospects was really a warning to Sarah. This is what happens when you don't play it safe. The decision to quit my job came 3 months later, triggered by an incident that had nothing to do with Rebecca but everything to do with who I was becoming. My boss, Mr. Morrison, called me into his office on a Tuesday morning to discuss my attitude problem. Apparently, I'd been asking too many questions in meetings, suggesting too many improvements to our processes, showing too much initiative. He wanted me to understand that my role was to execute, not to innovate. "Marcus," he said, leaning back in his leather chair, "you're a good analyst, but you need to remember your place in this organization. We have senior partners who handle strategy. Your job is to run the numbers they give you and produce the reports they request. Nothing more, nothing less." As he spoke, I found myself thinking about a restaurant consultation I'd done as a favor for a friend the previous weekend. The owner was struggling with cash flow and considering closing down. I'd spent 4 hours reviewing his books and operations, then proposed a simple reorganization of his kitchen workflow and a revision of his menu pricing. The changes cost him nothing to implement but could potentially increase his profit margins by 20%. He was so grateful that he tried to pay me despite my insistence that it was just friendly advice. Sitting in Morrison's office, being told to keep my head down and my mouth shut, I realized I was already running a consulting business. I was just doing it for free, in my spare time, because I loved solving problems and helping people succeed. The only question was whether I had the courage to bet on myself. That night, I told Sarah I was ready to take the leap. She was scared, we both were, but she could see the fire in my eyes when I talked about the business. She'd watched me gradually dying at Morrison & Associates, and she knew this was my chance to come alive again. We spent hours at the kitchen table, going over the numbers, discussing the risks, planning our temporary life of rice and beans and cheap rent. The hardest part wasn't the financial uncertainty, it was telling her family. We decided to wait until I'd been running the business for a few months before making any announcements, but word got out anyway. Rebecca had her sources, and she used them like a weapon. The confrontation happened at Sarah's cousin's wedding reception. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I was standing by the bar, waiting for our drinks, when Rebecca materialized beside me like a perfectly dressed storm cloud. She didn't bother with pleasantries this time. "So it's true then," she said. "You actually quit your job to play entrepreneur." "Sarah told Mom you moved into some studio apartment downtown." "How romantic." "It's temporary," I said. "We're investing in the future." "Whose future, Marcus?" "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're gambling with my sister's life. She's 31 years old. If she wants children, she's running out of time to find someone who can actually support a family." The implication that Sarah should leave me hit like a slap. I set down my drink carefully, trying to keep my voice steady. "Rebecca, I know you don't think much of me, but Sarah is my wife. She's capable of making her own decisions." "Is she?" "Because it seems to me like you've manipulated her into supporting your little fantasy." "Tell me, Marcus, what happens when this consulting thing fails?" "Because it will fail." "And then what?" "Sarah wakes up at 35, broke and childless, married to a man who couldn't provide for her when it mattered." Her words were calculated cruelty, designed to plant seeds of doubt that would grow in the dark hours when I was lying awake worrying about money. But there was something else in her voice too, a desperate edge that made me wonder if she was trying to convince herself as much as me. "You know what, Rebecca?" I said quietly. "I think you're afraid." "Afraid of what?" "Afraid that I might actually succeed. Because if I do, it means all your safe choices and careful planning might not be the only way to live. It means Sarah chose passion over security and got both." Rebecca's face went white, then red. "You arrogant little, is everything okay over here?" Sarah appeared between us, her wedding guest smile not quite hiding her concern. "Everything's fine," Rebecca said, composing herself with practiced ease. "Marcus and I were just discussing his new venture. I was telling him how proud we all are that he's finally pursuing his dreams." The lie was so smooth, so convincing, that for a moment I wondered if I'd imagined the venom in her voice. But Sarah knew her sister too well. She looked between us with growing suspicion. "What did you say to him, Rebecca?" "Nothing. I was being supportive." "Wasn't I, Marcus?" I could have exposed her right then, could have repeated her cruel predictions and forced Sarah to choose sides. But I didn't want to ruin a family wedding with drama, and part of me wanted to prove Rebecca wrong through my actions rather than my words. "She was very honest about her concerns," I said diplomatically. Sarah's eyes narrowed. She'd learned to read between the lines when it came to her sister's behavior. But before she could press further, the band started playing and the moment was lost in the shuffle of wedding festivities. That night, lying in our tiny studio apartment, Sarah asked me what Rebecca had really said. I told her the truth, all of it. Sarah was quiet for a long time afterward, and I could feel her processing not just Rebecca's words but the weight of the choice she'd made in supporting me. "Do you ever wonder if she's right?" Sarah asked finally. "About the risk we're taking?" "Every day," I admitted. "But I also know that if I don't try this now, I'll spend the rest of my life wondering what might have been. And I think that kind of regret would poison everything we're building together." Sarah turned to face me in the dark. "I married you because you dream big, Marcus. Don't let her take that away from you." Those words became my anchor during the hard months that followed. Because Rebecca was right about one thing: starting a business was brutal. My first few clients were small restaurants and cafes, mostly friends of friends who were willing to take a chance on an unproven consultant. The pay was inconsistent, the hours were long, and there were weeks when I seriously questioned my sanity. But slowly, quietly, something was building. My first real success came with a struggling Italian restaurant called Nana's Kitchen. The owner, an elderly man named Giuseppe, was 3 months behind on rent and ready to close his doors forever. The food was excellent, but his operations were a disaster. Orders were taking too long, food costs were out of control, and customer service was inconsistent. I spent 2 weeks shadowing Giuseppe and his staff, learning every aspect of the operation. Then I proposed a complete reorganization: new kitchen workflows, revised menu pricing, staff retraining, and a simple reservation system. Giuseppe was skeptical. He'd been running restaurants for 40 years, but he was desperate enough to try anything. The transformation was remarkable. Within 6 weeks, Nana's Kitchen went from bleeding money to turning a profit. Word of mouth brought new customers, and the improved service kept them coming back. Giuseppe was so grateful that he recommended me to 3 other restaurant owners in Little Italy. That's how my business grew, one satisfied client at a time, each success leading to new referrals. I specialized in operational efficiency, helping struggling establishments streamline their processes and maximize their profit margins. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was meaningful. I was helping people save their dreams, their livelihoods, their family businesses. Rebecca, of course, remained skeptical. At family gatherings, she'd ask pointed questions about my little projects, always with that tone that suggested I was playing house rather than running a real business. When I mentioned landing a contract with a boutique hotel chain, she laughed and said, "Well, that sounds important," in a voice that meant exactly the opposite. The turning point came 18 months after I'd started the business. I was working with a failing country club called Willowbrook, a once prestigious establishment that had been hemorrhaging members and money for years. The facilities were outdated, the management was incompetent, and the board of directors was considering bankruptcy. I'd been hired by the desperate general manager to do a complete operational analysis. What I found was worse than I'd expected, and better. The club's problems were systemic but solvable. The location was prime real estate, the facilities just needed updating, and the membership potential was enormous. But it would require a complete overhaul of everything from staffing to marketing to financial management. I spent 3 months developing a comprehensive turnaround plan. It was the most complex project I'd ever undertaken, requiring me to coordinate with architects, contractors, marketing specialists, and financial advisors. The scope was so large that I had to hire my first employees, 2 junior consultants who could help implement the changes. When I presented my findings to the board, I didn't just give them a plan to save the club. I gave them a vision of what it could become, a premier destination for corporate events, weddings, and high-end dining. The investment would be substantial, but the potential returns were extraordinary. That's when I made the decision that would change everything. Instead of just consulting on the turnaround, I offered to buy the club myself. The board members were initially skeptical. I was a young consultant with a 2-year-old business, hardly the profile of a typical country club owner. But my financial projections were solid, my vision was compelling, and most importantly, I had the backing of several investors who'd been impressed by my previous work. The negotiation took months. There were legal hurdles, financing challenges, and moments when I thought the whole deal would fall apart. Sarah and I were living off savings and credit cards, betting everything on a dream that seemed impossible to everyone except us. Rebecca, naturally, had opinions about my latest scheme. When word got out that I was trying to buy a country club, she cornered Sarah at their mother's birthday party. "A country club, Sarah? Really? Does Marcus have any idea what he's gotten himself into? Those places are money pits. He's going to lose everything, and he's going to drag you down with him." Sarah had reached her breaking point with her sister's negativity. "Rebecca, enough. You've been predicting Marcus's failure for 2 years now, and you've been wrong every single time. His business is thriving. His clients love him. And yes, buying the club is a risk, but it's a calculated risk based on solid analysis and planning. Solid analysis? Rebecca laughed. Sarah, he's a consultant, not a businessman. There's a huge difference between giving advice and actually running something. Mark my words, this country club fantasy is going to be the end of your marriage. But Sarah had seen what I'd built from nothing. She'd watched me work 18-hour days, seen me solve problems that others thought were impossible, witnessed the transformation of every business I'd touched. She knew what Rebecca couldn't see, that I wasn't just dreaming anymore. I was executing. The day I signed the papers to purchase Willowbrook Country Club was the most terrifying and exhilarating day of my life. Sarah was there with me, holding my hand as I wrote the biggest check I'd ever imagined writing. The previous owners looked relieved to be walking away from their problems. The lawyers shuffled papers with professional efficiency. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I could hear Rebecca's voice predicting my spectacular failure. But I wasn't that scared consultant who'd quit his corporate job anymore. I'd learned to trust my instincts, to take calculated risks, to bet on myself when no one else would. The club was in rough shape, but I could see its potential like a blueprint in my mind. I knew exactly what needed to be done, and I had the team to do it. The renovation took 8 months. We updated the dining rooms, modernized the kitchen, renovated the golf course, and added new amenities like a spa and fitness center. I hired a world-class chef, retrained the entire staff, and launched a marketing campaign targeting corporate clients and young professionals who'd been ignored by the club's previous management. During those months, Rebecca's prediction seemed to be coming true. The renovation costs were enormous, the timeline was longer than expected, and there were weeks when I wondered if I'd bitten off more than I could chew. Sarah never complained, never said "I told you so," never made me feel like I was dragging her down. She believed in me even when I didn't believe in myself. The reopening was scheduled for a Friday night in September. We'd invited potential members, local business leaders, and the press. Everything had to be perfect, the food, the service, the atmosphere. This was our one chance to make a first impression that would determine whether Willowbrook succeeded or failed. 2 days before the reopening, Sarah mentioned casually that her 10-year high school reunion was that same weekend. She'd been planning to skip it, we were too busy with the club launch to think about high school nostalgia, but her friend Jennifer had been begging her to come. "Where's the reunion?" I asked, not really paying attention as I reviewed the final service schedules. "Oh, they're having it at some country club. I think it's called Willowbrook or something like that." I looked up from my papers. "What did you say?" "The reunion. It's at Willowbrook Country Club. Jennifer said they got a great deal on the venue. Apparently, it's under new management and they're trying to drum up business." The irony was so perfect it felt like destiny. Sarah's high school reunion, the same reunion Rebecca would be attending as a proud alumna, was going to be held at my country club. The country club that Rebecca had predicted would destroy my marriage and bankrupt my family. I started laughing. Not a polite chuckle, but deep, uncontrollable laughter that made Sarah worry I was having some kind of breakdown. "Marcus, are you okay?" "Rebecca's going to be here," I managed between fits of laughter. "Your sister's going to walk into my country club, not knowing it's mine, and probably make some comment about how nice it is that I'm finally learning my place in the world." Sarah's eyes widened as the implications hit her. "Oh my God. You're not going to tell her beforehand, are you? And ruin the surprise?" "Not a chance." That's how I found myself standing in the foyer of Willowbrook Country Club last Saturday evening, wearing a custom-tailored suit and the kind of quiet confidence that comes from proving every doubter wrong. The reunion was in full swing, the dining room filled with Sarah's former classmates and their spouses, everyone dressed in their finest clothes and catching up on 10 years of life. Rebecca was holding court near the bar, regaling a group of women with stories about her husband's medical practice and their recent vacation to Tuscany. She looked exactly the same as always, perfectly put together, supremely confident, completely unaware that the world was about to shift beneath her feet. I watched her for a moment, remembering all the cruel predictions, all the dismissive comments, All the time she'd made me feel small and worthless. Then I walked over to the bar and ordered a drink from Tony, the bartender I'd hired 3 months earlier. "Everything going well tonight, Mr. Chen?" Tony asked quietly. "Perfect," I said. "Absolutely perfect." Rebecca glanced over at the sound of my name, clearly surprised to see me at what she considered a high-class establishment. Her eyebrows raised slightly as she took in my expensive suit and the easy familiarity with which the staff treated me. Well, she said, approaching the bar with her usual predatory smile. "Marcus. I didn't expect to see you here. Sarah didn't mention you were coming to the reunion." "Wouldn't miss it," I said, accepting my drink from Tony. "This is a beautiful venue, don't you think?" Rebecca glanced around approvingly. "Oh yes, it's lovely. Completely renovated, from what I hear. The new owner really knows what he's doing. It's nice to see you somewhere appropriate for once." The condescension in her voice was exactly what I'd expected, but for the first time in years, it didn't sting. Instead, it filled me with a warm sense of anticipation. "You know, Rebecca," I said casually, "I couldn't agree more about the new owner. From what I hear, he's really transformed this place." Rebecca continued examining the renovated ballroom with the air of someone appraising fine art. She traced her finger along the marble bar top, nodding approvingly at the crystal chandeliers and mahogany paneling. The irony of watching her praise my work while simultaneously insulting my capabilities was almost too delicious to bear. "You know what I love most about places like this," she said, gesturing grandly at the elegant surroundings. "They represent real success. Established wealth. The kind of stability that comes from making smart choices rather than chasing fantasies." I took a slow sip of my whiskey, savoring both the smooth burn and the moment. "What kind of fantasies?" "Oh, you know the type. People who think they can just quit their jobs and become entrepreneurs overnight. It's so naive." She laughed, that particular laugh she reserved for topics she found especially amusing. "I mean, look at this place. Do you think the owner started as some nobody consultant? Of course not. This kind of success requires real business acumen, serious capital, established connections." Sarah appeared beside us, radiant in a deep blue dress that complemented her eyes. She'd been circulating through the reunion, catching up with old friends and carefully avoiding any mention of my new ownership. We'd agreed to let the evening unfold naturally, to let Rebecca dig her own grave with her assumptions. "Having a good time, honey?" Sarah asked, slipping her arm through mine. "Fascinating conversation," I replied. Rebecca was just explaining the difference between real success and naive dreaming. Sarah's lips twitched slightly. She knew exactly what was coming. "Oh really? That sounds educational." "Very," Rebecca agreed, warming to her theme. "I was telling Marcus how refreshing it is to be somewhere that represents genuine achievement. Not everyone can appreciate that distinction, of course. Some people are so caught up in their own little struggles that they can't recognize true excellence when they see it." The comment was clearly directed at me, another subtle reminder of my supposed inadequacy compared to the sophisticated world she inhabited. But as I looked around the room, my room, filled with satisfied guests enjoying carefully crafted cuisine prepared in my kitchen by my chef, I felt nothing but profound satisfaction. "You're absolutely right," I said. "It takes vision to create something like this. The ability to see potential where others see only problems. Most people would look at a failing business and walk away. But sometimes the right person comes along who can transform disaster into triumph." Rebecca nodded enthusiastically. "Exactly. That's what separates real business people from wannabes. Real vision, real commitment, real results." She gestured toward the busy dining room where reunion guests were enjoying their meals. "I mean, just look at this operation. Everything running like clockwork. You can tell this owner knows what he's doing." Jennifer Martinez, Sarah's former roommate and one of the reunion organizers, approached our little group with a clipboard and a stressed expression. She'd been running around all evening, coordinating with the catering staff and making sure everything was perfect for her classmates. "Sarah. There you are," Jennifer said breathlessly. "I've been looking everywhere for you. I wanted to personally thank you and Marcus for everything you've done to make tonight possible." Rebecca's eyebrows raised slightly. "What do you mean?" Jennifer turned to Rebecca with confusion. "Oh, you don't know? Marcus owns this place. He's the one who gave us such an incredible deal on the venue. Without his generosity, we never could have afforded something this elegant." The silence that followed was absolute. Rebecca's face went through a fascinating series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, shock, and finally something approaching panic. Her mouth opened and closed several times without producing sound, like a fish gasping for air. "I'm sorry," Rebecca finally managed. "Did you say Marcus owns this place?" "The whole club," Jennifer confirmed cheerfully. "He bought it about 2 years ago and completely transformed it. The renovation is incredible, don't you think? Marcus, you should be so proud. This place was practically falling apart when you took over, and now look at it." I watched Rebecca process this information, saw the exact moment when all her confident assumptions crumbled. Her eyes darted around the room as if seeing it for the first time, taking in details she'd missed before. The staff greeting me by name. The manager who'd approached earlier to ask about tomorrow's corporate event. The way I moved through the space with the casual authority of ownership. "But," Rebecca stammered, "you're a consultant. You do small projects. Restaurants and cafes." "I started with restaurants and cafes," I corrected gently. "But successful businesses tend to grow. Evolution, you might say." Sarah squeezed my arm, and I could feel her silent laughter. This was the moment we'd both been anticipating and dreading. The moment when Rebecca's carefully constructed worldview collided with reality. "I need another drink," Rebecca announced suddenly, her voice strained. She turned toward the bar without waiting for a response, leaving Sarah, Jennifer, and me standing in awkward silence. "Did I say something wrong?" Jennifer asked quietly. "Not at all," Sarah assured her. "You said exactly the right thing." As the evening progressed, I found myself watching Rebecca navigate this new reality. She'd retreat to conversations with old classmates, trying to regain her footing in familiar territory, but I could see her stealing glances at me throughout the night. Each time she looked, I was engaged in some aspect of running the club, discussing tomorrow's wedding reception with the event coordinator, reviewing the wine selection with the sommelier, or simply moving through my domain with quiet confidence. The transformation in how others treated me was equally revealing. Classmates who'd barely acknowledged my existence during previous family gatherings now approached with genuine interest and respect. They wanted to know about the renovation, about my business philosophy, about my plans for the club's future. Word had spread quickly through the reunion that the successful young entrepreneur they'd been admiring all evening was the same Marcus Chen that Rebecca had been dismissing for years. Around 10 o'clock, I was reviewing the evening's receipts with Maria, my assistant manager, when Rebecca finally approached me directly. She'd clearly spent the past hour working up the courage for this conversation, and I could see the internal struggle playing out across her features. "Marcus," she said, her voice carefully controlled. "Could I speak with you privately for a moment?" I looked up from the paperwork. "Of course. Maria, could you give us a few minutes?" Maria nodded and disappeared into the kitchen, leaving Rebecca and me alone in the small office behind the main desk. Rebecca closed the door carefully before turning to face me, and I could see she'd been crying. Not openly, but enough to leave faint streaks in her makeup. "I owe you an apology," she said quietly. I leaned back in my chair, studying her face. This was not the Rebecca I'd known for 5 years. The confident superiority was gone, replaced by something I'd never seen from her before, genuine humility. "For what specifically?" I asked. I wasn't trying to be cruel, but I wanted to hear her acknowledge exactly what she'd done. Rebecca took a shaky breath. "For everything. For dismissing your dreams. For undermining your confidence. For trying to convince Sarah that you weren't good enough for her. For treating you like you were somehow less worthy because you didn't fit into my narrow definition of success. The words hung in the air between us. I'd imagined this moment many times over the years, but I'd always pictured it with more anger, more vindication. Instead, I felt only a deep weariness. Why? I asked simply. Because I was scared, she admitted. Because watching you take risks made me question all the safe choices I'd made. Because seeing Sarah support your dreams reminded me of all the dreams I'd given up to marry James. Because your courage made my carefully constructed life feel like a prison. This was more honesty than I'd ever gotten from Rebecca, more vulnerability than I'd thought she was capable of. But it was also 5 years too late. Rebecca, I appreciate the apology. I really do. But you need to understand what your words did to me. There were nights when I lay awake wondering if you were right, if I was being selfish, if I was going to destroy the woman I loved because I was too stubborn to accept my limitations. I know, she whispered. Sarah told me how much my comments hurt you. She told me I was poisoning our family with my negativity. She was right. Then why didn't you stop? Rebecca was quiet for a long moment, staring at the framed photo on my desk, a picture of Sarah and me at the club's grand reopening, both of us beaming with pride and exhaustion. Because stopping would have meant admitting I was wrong about everything. About success, about security, about what really matters in life. It was easier to keep tearing you down than to face the possibility that I'd wasted years building a life I didn't actually want. The conversation was interrupted by a soft knock on the door. Sarah peeked in, her face concerned. Everything okay in here? She asked. We're fine, I said, standing up. Rebecca was just apologizing, Rebecca finished. Something I should have done years ago. Sarah looked between us, reading the emotional weight in the room. Becca, what's going on? Rebecca straightened her shoulders, some of her old composure returning. I've been a terrible sister and an even worse sister-in-law. Marcus has accomplished something extraordinary here, and instead of celebrating his success, I've spent years trying to tear him down. I was wrong about everything. Sarah's eyes widened. In all the years I'd known the family, I'd never heard Rebecca admit to being wrong about anything, let alone something this fundamental. I need to go find James, Rebecca continued. I need to tell him what Marcus has accomplished. I need to make this right. After Rebecca left, Sarah and I stood alone in the office. The sounds of the reunion continued outside, laughter, conversation, the clink of glasses and silverware. But in our small bubble of privacy, the weight of the evening's revelations settled between us. How do you feel? Sarah asked. I considered the question carefully. Honestly? Empty. I thought vindication would feel different. More satisfying, I guess. You're a better person than I am, Sarah said. I wanted her to suffer the way she made you suffer. I wanted her to feel as small as she made you feel. Maybe that's what just happened. Maybe realizing she was wrong about everything is its own kind of suffering. Sarah moved closer, wrapping her arms around my waist. I'm proud of you. Not just for what you've built here, but for how you handled tonight. You could have humiliated her in front of everyone. You could have made her pay publicly for every cruel comment. I thought about it, I admitted. But destroying her wouldn't have made me feel better. It would have just made me like her. We were interrupted again by Maria returning with the evening's final reports. The reunion had been a resounding success from every angle, financial, operational, and promotional. Word of mouth from tonight's guests would likely generate dozens of new bookings. Mr. Chen, Maria said, there's something else. Dr. Whitfield is asking to speak with you. He's in the main bar with his wife. I exchanged glances with Sarah. James rarely spoke to me directly at family gatherings, usually communicating through Rebecca or simply ignoring my presence entirely. Whatever he wanted to discuss must be significant. We found James and Rebecca at a corner table in the bar, deep in quiet conversation. Rebecca's makeup had been repaired, but her eyes were still red-rimmed. James stood as we approached, extending his hand in a gesture that was both formal and genuinely respectful. "Marcus," he said, "I owe you a conversation." Several conversations, actually. We sat down, and I waited for him to continue. James was not a man given to spontaneous emotional displays, and I could see him choosing his words carefully. "Rebecca has told me about your discussion," he began. "She's also told me things about her behavior over the years that I should have noticed and addressed. I failed you both by staying silent when I should have spoken up. This was unexpected." James had always struck me as somewhat oblivious to family dynamics, lost in his medical practice and content to let Rebecca manage their social relationships. The idea that he'd been aware of her behavior and chosen to ignore it was somehow worse than thinking he'd simply missed it. "I told myself I was staying neutral," James continued. "But neutrality in the face of cruelty is just cowardice dressed up as diplomacy. I should have defended you. I should have told my wife to stop undermining her sister's marriage." "Why didn't you?" Sarah asked quietly. James looked uncomfortable, glancing at Rebecca before answering. "Because it was easier to let her tear others down than to deal with her tearing me down. Because I knew that if I challenged her behavior toward Marcus, she might turn that same energy toward examining our own relationship. And honestly, I wasn't sure our marriage would survive that kind of scrutiny." The admission hung heavy in the air. Rebecca reached across the table and took James's hand, a gesture that seemed both supportive and desperate. "We're going to counseling," Rebecca said suddenly. "James and I. We've been avoiding problems in our marriage by focusing on everyone else's relationships. It's time we dealt with our own issues." I nodded, unsure how to respond to such personal revelations. Part of me wanted to feel satisfaction at learning their seemingly perfect marriage was built on the same foundation of fear and pretense that had fueled Rebecca's attacks on me. But mostly I felt sad for them, and for Sarah, who was learning that her sister's cruelty had deeper roots than simple jealousy. "I want you to know," James said, turning back to me, "that what you've accomplished here is remarkable. The business acumen, the vision, the execution, it's all first-rate. I should have recognized that years ago." "Thank you," I said simply. There wasn't much else to say. "There's something else," James continued. "I'd like to propose a toast. To the whole reunion, if you're willing." I was about to ask what he had in mind when he stood and walked to the center of the bar area. The room gradually quieted as people noticed the distinguished doctor preparing to speak. "Ladies and gentlemen," James began, his voice carrying easily across the space. "If I could have your attention for just a moment. I know this has been a wonderful evening of reconnection and celebration, and I don't want to interrupt the festivities for long. But I felt compelled to share something with all of you." I felt my stomach tighten. I had no idea where this was going, and Sarah's grip on my hand suggested she was equally nervous. "Many of you have commented tonight on the exceptional quality of this venue," James continued. "The food, the service, the atmosphere, everything has been absolutely perfect. What you may not realize is that we owe this magical evening to one of our own. Marcus Chen, husband to our beloved Sarah, is the owner and visionary behind Willowbrook Country Club's remarkable transformation." A murmur of surprise rippled through the room. Several people turned to look at me with new interest and appreciation. "I've had the privilege of watching Marcus build his business over the past few years," James went on, "and I can tell you that what you see here tonight is the result of extraordinary dedication, brilliant strategic thinking, and the kind of entrepreneurial courage that most of us can only admire from a distance." My face was burning with embarrassment, but I could see genuine pride in James's expression. This wasn't a performance or an attempt at damage control. He meant every word. Marcus took a struggling, forgotten institution and transformed it into something that brings joy to our community. But more than that, he did it with integrity, treating his employees with respect and his customers with genuine care. Tonight, we've all benefited from his vision and hard work. James raised his glass toward me. "So I'd like to propose a toast to Marcus Chen, entrepreneur, visionary, and the man who made this perfect evening possible. To Marcus." The response was immediate and enthusiastic. "To Marcus," echoed throughout the room as glasses were raised and people applauded. I stood awkwardly, overwhelmed by the unexpected recognition and the genuine warmth in the faces around me. But the most meaningful response came from Rebecca, who had tears streaming down her cheeks as she raised her glass higher than anyone else's. In that moment, I saw not the cruel woman who had tormented me for years, but Sarah's older sister who had lost her way and was trying to find her path back to decency. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of congratulations, business cards, and genuine connections. People who had been polite but distant during previous family gatherings now sought me out for real conversations about business, about their own career challenges, about the risks and rewards of entrepreneurship. I found myself holding court in the way Rebecca usually did, but without the underlying need to diminish others to elevate myself. Around midnight, as the reunion was winding down, I found myself alone on the club's terrace overlooking the golf course. The night air was cool and crisp, carrying the scent of autumn leaves and the distant sound of departing cars. I needed a moment to process everything that had happened, to reconcile the man I'd been when I arrived tonight with the man I was now. Sarah found me there a few minutes later, 2 cups of coffee in her hands. She settled into the chair beside me, and we sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars reflect on the water hazard near the 18th green. "Penny for your thoughts," she said finally. "I was thinking about that night 5 years ago when I decided to quit my job," I said. "Remember how scared we were? How impossible everything seemed? I remember you pacing around our apartment for 3 hours, making lists of everything that could go wrong. And now look where we are. Sometimes I can barely believe it's real." Sarah reached over and took my hand. "It's real because you made it real. Every sleepless night, every rejected proposal, every moment when you wanted to give up but didn't, it all led to this." "We made it real," I corrected. "You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. You supported my crazy dream when everyone else thought I was destroying our future." "Speaking of everyone else," Sarah said carefully, "how do you feel about Rebecca's apology?" I considered the question. "Relieved, I think. Not because I needed her approval, but because it means you don't have to choose between supporting me and maintaining a relationship with your sister. That was always my biggest fear, that my success would come at the cost of your family." "You know what the strangest part of tonight was?" Sarah asked. "Watching people see you the way I've always seen you. For years, I felt like I was the only one who recognized how special you are, how much potential you had. Tonight, a whole room full of people finally caught up to what I've known all along." We were interrupted by the sound of footsteps on the terrace. Rebecca appeared in the doorway, hesitant and unsure. She'd changed out of her cocktail dress into jeans and a sweater, looking more like the big sister Sarah remembered from childhood than the polished society wife she'd become. "I'm sorry to interrupt," Rebecca said. "I just wanted to say goodbye before we left." "You don't have to leave on our account," Sarah said. "Actually, I do. James and I have a lot to talk about, and we need to do it away from here. Away from all the performance and pretense." Rebecca looked at me directly. "Marcus, I meant what I said earlier. About being wrong, about the apology. But I also want you to know that I'm going to do better. Not just with you, but with everyone. Tonight showed me who I've become, and I don't like that person. Change is hard," I said. "But it's possible. I should know." Rebecca smiled, the first genuine smile I'd ever seen from her. "Thank you for saying that. And thank you for not destroying me tonight when you had every right to do so." After Rebecca and James left, Sarah and I remained on the terrace until nearly 2 in the morning. We talked about the future, about our plans for the club, about the family we wanted to start now that we finally had the stability and confidence to take that step. We talked about Rebecca's apology and whether her change of heart was genuine or just expedient. We talked about forgiveness and second chances and the strange ways that success can change not just how others see you, but how you see yourself. But mostly we just sat together in the quiet satisfaction of a dream realized, a challenge overcome, a future secured through hard work and unwavering faith in each other. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Running a country club was a complex, demanding business, but tonight was ours to savor. As we finally prepared to leave, I took one last walk through the empty dining room. The tables had been cleared, the linens changed, the floors swept clean. In a few hours, my staff would arrive to prepare for tomorrow's corporate luncheon and evening wedding reception. The cycle would begin again, as it did every day in the business I had built from nothing but vision and determination. I thought about the scared, uncertain consultant who had walked away from Morrison and Associates 5 years ago, betting everything on an untested dream. That man could never have imagined standing where I stood tonight, not just as the owner of a successful business, but as someone who had earned the respect of his peers and the admiration of his community. The journey from there to here had been harder than I'd expected, longer than I'd hoped, and more rewarding than I'd dared to dream. But the most important part wasn't the financial success or the public recognition or even Rebecca's long overdue apology. The most important part was knowing that I'd stayed true to myself throughout the entire process, that I'd built something meaningful without sacrificing my integrity or my values. As Sarah and I walked to our car, the same modest sedan we'd driven throughout the lean years, because some things were worth keeping even when you could afford to replace them, I realized that tonight had been about more than just proving Rebecca wrong. It had been about proving to myself that the scared young man who'd taken such a massive risk 5 years ago had made the right choice. Not everyone gets the chance to see their doubters publicly acknowledge their error. Not everyone gets to experience the satisfaction of vindication so complete and so witnessed. But as satisfying as those moments had been, they paled in comparison to the quiet pride I felt in what Sarah and I had built together, not just a business, but a life based on courage, faith, and the unwavering belief that sometimes the biggest risk is not taking any risk at all. The reunion was over, but our story was just beginning. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new dreams to chase and obstacles to overcome. But tonight, driving home through the quiet streets of our town, I knew with absolute certainty that whatever came next, we would face it together, stronger and more confident than ever before. The scared consultant was gone, replaced by a man who had learned to trust his instincts, believe in his vision, and never again allow anyone else to define the limits of his potential. It had taken 5 years, countless sleepless nights, and more courage than I'd known I possessed, but I'd finally become the man Sarah had always believed I could be. And that, more than any business success or public vindication, was the real victory of this remarkable night. 3 months after the reunion, life had settled into a rhythm I had never imagined possible. The country club was thriving beyond my wildest projections, booked solid through the next 18 months with weddings, corporate events, and private parties. Word had spread throughout the region about Willowbrook's transformation, and we were attracting clients from 3 states away. But success, I was learning, brought its own unique set of challenges. The morning started like any other, with me arriving at the club before dawn to review the day's schedule with my management team. We had a charity golf tournament at 8, followed by a business luncheon, and then preparations for what promised to be our biggest wedding of the year. Everything was running smoothly until Maria approached me with a concerned expression and a manila envelope. "This was delivered by courier about an hour ago," she said, handing me the package. The delivery guy said it was urgent. The return address made my stomach drop. Morrison and Associates. My former employer. I hadn't heard from them since the day I'd cleaned out my desk 5 years ago, and I couldn't imagine why they'd be contacting me now. Inside was a formal letter on expensive letterhead, signed by Mr. Morrison himself. As I read, my hands began to tremble slightly. The law firm was facing a major financial scandal involving embezzled client funds and fraudulent accounting practices. Several senior partners were under federal investigation, and the firm was hemorrhaging clients and money. But that wasn't why they'd contacted me. They wanted to hire me as a consultant to help restructure their operations and restore their reputation. The irony was breathtaking. The same man who'd told me to know my place and stick to running numbers was now begging me to save his failing business. The proposed fee was more than I'd made in my entire final year as their employee. I set the letter aside and tried to focus on the day ahead, but I couldn't shake the strange mixture of vindication and sadness it had stirred up. Part of me wanted to frame the letter as a monument to how dramatically my life had changed. Another part wondered what would have happened if Mr. Morrison had recognized my potential 5 years ago instead of trying to crush it. The charity tournament went off without a hitch, raising over $40,000 for local veterans programs. As I watched the participants enjoying themselves on my golf course, eating lunch prepared by my chef, I felt the deep satisfaction that came from knowing I'd built something that made a positive difference in my community. Around noon, I was reviewing catering arrangements for the evening wedding when my phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Turn on Channel 7 News. Now." I found a television in the main office and switched to the local news station. The anchor was discussing the Morrison and Associates scandal, but what caught my attention was the sidebar graphic showing the firm's downtown office building. I recognized several former colleagues being escorted out by federal agents, their faces hidden behind briefcases and jackets. The reporter was explaining how the fraud had been discovered when a whistleblower came forward with evidence of systematic billing irregularities and client fund misappropriation. The whistleblower's identity was being protected, but according to the report, this person had been trying to expose the corruption for years before finally going to the authorities. My phone rang. "Sarah. Are you watching this?" she asked without preamble. "Yeah. It's surreal. Marcus, there's something else. Rebecca called me 20 minutes ago. James got a call from his attorney this morning. Apparently, Morrison and Associates was handling some of his malpractice insurance, and now he's scrambling to find new representation before his coverage lapses." I absorbed this information slowly. The ripple effects of Morrison's downfall were spreading further than I'd realized. How many people were going to be hurt by the greed and corruption I'd once been surrounded by? "There's more," Sarah continued. "Rebecca asked if you might be willing to recommend a good attorney for James. She said she knows it's asking a lot, given their history with you, but they're genuinely worried about his practice being affected." The request was so unexpected that I had to sit down. 6 months ago, Rebecca had been predicting my imminent failure. Now she was asking for my help in a professional crisis. The transformation in our relationship since the reunion had been gradual but genuine. She'd stopped making snide comments about my work, started asking thoughtful questions about the business, and even referred several potential clients to the club. "What did you tell her?" I asked. "That I'd talk to you. Marcus, I know she doesn't deserve your help after everything she put you through, but she's your sister, and James is a good man who got caught up in his wife's problems. I'll make some calls." After hanging up, I spent an hour on the phone with attorney contacts I'd made through the business community. By the afternoon, I'd arranged for James to meet with one of the city's most respected malpractice attorneys, someone who could expedite the transfer of his coverage and ensure his practice remained protected. When I called Rebecca to share the information, she was quiet for a long moment before speaking. "Marcus, I don't know how to thank you for this. After everything I've done, Rebecca, we're family. That's what family does for each other." Another pause. "I'm trying to be better. The counseling is helping, but it's hard to face how much damage I've caused. Not just to you, but to Sarah, to James, to myself. Change is a process, not an event. What matters is that you're making the effort." That evening's wedding was spectacular. The bride and groom were a young couple from Chicago who'd chosen Willowbrook after seeing photos of our renovated ballroom online. As I watched them exchange vows in our garden pavilion, surrounded by 300 guests and bathed in golden sunset light, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. 5 years ago, I'd been a number cruncher in a corrupt firm, afraid to pursue my dreams because other people had convinced me I wasn't qualified to run my own business. Tonight, I was watching a couple celebrate the beginning of their life together in a venue I'd saved from bankruptcy and transformed into something beautiful. After the ceremony, as guests moved to the reception, I noticed a familiar face in the crowd. Detective Patricia Hernandez from the White Collar Crime Unit. We'd met several months earlier when I'd been asked to review financial documents for an unrelated case. She approached me during the cocktail hour with her characteristic directness. "Marcus, I wanted to thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "The Morrison case. Your insights about their billing practices were instrumental in building our case." I was confused. "Detective, I haven't spoken to you about Morrison and Associates." She smiled grimly. Not directly, no. But remember that consultation you did for us last spring? When we asked you to review those accounting irregularities in the Peterson embezzlement case. You mentioned some red flags you'd noticed in financial documents that reminded you of practices you'd seen at your previous employer. The memory came flooding back. During that consultation, I'd made some offhand comments about billing irregularities I'd witnessed at Morrison, patterns that had always bothered me but that I'd never thought to question at the time. Those observations led us to take a closer look at Morrison's books, Detective Hernandez continued. We discovered that several of their practices were identical to what Peterson had been doing. That's when we realized we might be looking at a much larger pattern of fraud. I felt a chill run down my spine. Are you saying I'm the whistleblower? Inadvertently, yes. Your expertise helped us understand what we were looking at. Without your insights, we might never have connected the dots. As Detective Hernandez walked away, I stood frozen in the middle of the reception, processing what I'd just learned. I'd brought down my former employer without even realizing it. My decision to leave Morrison and build my own consulting business hadn't just changed my life, it had potentially saved dozens of clients from financial ruin. The irony was overwhelming. Morrison had tried to keep me in my place, to prevent me from developing the expertise that might threaten his control. But in doing so, he'd created the very situation that led to his downfall. If he'd nurtured my talents instead of suppressing them, I might still be there, loyal and ignorant of the corruption around me. Sarah found me standing alone on the terrace, staring out at the golf course lit by moonlight and strategically placed spotlights. You look like you've seen a ghost, she said, wrapping her arms around me from behind. I told her about my conversation with Detective Hernandez. She listened in amazed silence as I explained how my casual observations during an unrelated consultation had ultimately led to the investigation that toppled Morrison and Associates. Do you feel guilty? She asked when I finished. That's just it, I don't. I should, maybe, but I don't. What they were doing was wrong. They were stealing from clients, lying to the courts, corrupting the entire system. The fact that I helped expose it, even accidentally, feels like justice. What about all the employees who lost their jobs? I'd been wrestling with that question all afternoon. The honest ones will find new positions. Their skills and integrity will serve them well elsewhere. As for the others, I shrugged. They made their choices. We stood in comfortable silence, watching the last of the wedding guests enjoying themselves in the ballroom below. The bride and groom were in the center of the dance floor, lost in each other's eyes, oblivious to the complex web of events that had brought them to celebrate their love in my club. Marcus, Sarah said softly, do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd stayed at Morrison? If you'd never taken the risk of starting your own business? I considered the question carefully. I think I would have discovered the fraud eventually. But instead of accidentally helping the authorities, I might have tried to address it internally. And Morrison would have destroyed me for it. He'd have found a way to discredit me, maybe even implicate me in the corruption. I'd have ended up as a scapegoat instead of a success story. So leaving wasn't just about following your dreams. It was about maintaining your integrity. Maybe that's the same thing. Maybe dreams and integrity are more connected than we realize. The next morning brought another surprise. I was reviewing vendor contracts in my office when Maria knocked and announced that I had visitors. James and Rebecca were in the lobby, asking if they could speak with me privately. I found them sitting awkwardly in the main lounge, both looking more nervous than I'd ever seen them. Rebecca stood as I approached, and I noticed she was holding a small gift bag. Marcus, thank you for seeing us, James said. And thank you for connecting me with Attorney Richardson. He's already begun the process of transferring my malpractice coverage, and he's confident everything will be resolved within the week. I'm glad it worked out. Rebecca stepped forward, extending the gift bag. This is from both of us. A small token of our appreciation. Inside was an elegant crystal paperweight engraved with the words Willowbrook Country Club and the date of our grand reopening. It was the kind of thoughtful, personal gift that Rebecca had never given me before. We wanted to ask you something, James continued. Rebecca and I have been talking about making some changes in our lives. We've decided to sell the house and downsize. We want to travel more, focus on experiences rather than possessions. And we were wondering if you might be interested in handling the estate sale. I was surprised by the request. I appreciate the thought, but I'm not in the estate sale business. We know, Rebecca said quickly. But you have connections throughout the community now. People trust your judgment. And honestly, we'd feel more comfortable working with family than with strangers. The word family hung in the air between us. 6 months ago, Rebecca had barely acknowledged my existence. Now she was asking me to help her liquidate her most valuable possessions. Of course I'll help, I said. But are you sure about this? That house has been your home for 15 years. Rebecca and James exchanged glances. It's been our prison for 15 years, Rebecca corrected. We've been so focused on maintaining appearances, on having the right address and the right furniture and the right image, that we forgot to build a real life together. The counseling has helped us realize that we want something different. What will you do after you sell? We're thinking about buying a small place near the coast, James said. Somewhere I can practice part-time and Rebecca can pursue some of the interests she gave up when we got married. She used to paint, you know. Beautiful landscapes. I'd love to see her pick up a brush again. I looked at Rebecca, trying to imagine her as an artist rather than a socialite. I'd like to see her work sometime. Maybe I'll paint the club, she said with a shy smile. It would be nice to create something beautiful instead of just tearing things down. After they left, I spent the rest of the morning thinking about transformation and second chances. Rebecca's journey from cruel critic to supportive family member had been remarkable to witness. She was discovering that changing her behavior wasn't just about making amends for past wrongs, it was about creating space for the person she wanted to become. That afternoon brought yet another unexpected development. I was meeting with our event coordinator about next month's charity auction when my assistant buzzed to say I had a call from the mayor's office. Mayor Catherine Williams wanted to discuss a proposal involving the club. 20 minutes later, Mayor Williams was sitting in my office, outlining an ambitious plan to make Willowbrook the centerpiece of a new tourism initiative. The city was applying for a state grant to promote culinary and recreational tourism, and they wanted to feature our club as a flagship destination. The grant would fund marketing campaigns, infrastructure improvements, and event programming, she explained. We're talking about potentially millions of dollars in economic impact for the region. But we need a committed partner, someone who shares our vision for sustainable, high-quality tourism development. The opportunity was enormous, but so was the responsibility. Accepting would mean expanding our operations significantly, hiring more staff, and taking on a much more public role in the community's economic development. What would you need from me? I asked. Leadership, Mayor Williams said simply. We want you to chair the Tourism Development Committee. Your business acumen, your track record of successful transformation, and your reputation in the community make you the ideal candidate. I thought about the scared consultant who'd quit his corporate job 5 years ago, terrified of taking any risk that might affect his modest but secure income. That man could never have imagined being asked to lead a multi-million-dollar economic development initiative. I'll need to discuss this with my wife and my management team, I said. But yes, I'm interested. After Mayor Williams left, I called Sarah to tell her about the proposal. Her excitement was immediate and infectious. Marcus, this is incredible. Do you realize what this means? You're not just successful now, you're a community leader. People look to you for vision and guidance. It's a big responsibility. It's exactly the kind of responsibility you were born to handle. Remember when you told me you wanted to build something that would make a positive difference? This is your chance to impact thousands of lives. That evening, Sarah and I hosted a small dinner party at the club for some close friends and business associates. As we sat around the table in our private dining room, sharing good food and easy conversation, I reflected on how different my life had become. The guests included Jennifer Martinez, who'd become one of our most effective event promoters, Detective Hernandez, who'd become a friend as well as a professional contact, Attorney Richardson, who'd helped James navigate his crisis, and several other community leaders who'd become part of our extended network. During dessert, Jennifer raised her glass for a toast to Marcus and Sarah, who proved that sometimes the biggest risk is not taking any risk at all. Thank you for showing us what's possible when courage meets vision. As glasses clinked around the table, I caught Sarah's eye across the flickering candlelight. She was radiant with pride and happiness, but more than that, she looked fulfilled in a way I'd never seen before. We'd built something together that was bigger than either of us could have achieved alone. After our guests left, Sarah and I walked through the quiet club, turning off lights and checking that everything was secure for the night. It was a ritual we'd developed, a way of staying connected to the daily operations even as the business grew larger and more complex. Do you remember our first date? Sarah asked as we passed the main bar. Of course. Coffee shop near my old office, caught in that rainstorm. You told me that night about your dream of running your own business. You were so passionate when you talked about it, but also so afraid. You kept saying it was probably impossible, that people like you didn't get to run companies. I smiled at the memory. People like me. I had such a limited view of what was possible. But I could see it, even then. I could see the leader you were meant to become. That's why I fell in love with you, not because you were safe or predictable, but because you had the courage to dream bigger than your circumstances. We paused in the main ballroom, where tomorrow night's corporate event was already being set up. The space that had once been shabby and neglected now gleamed with polished surfaces and elegant fixtures. Sometimes I still can't believe this is real, I admitted. Sometimes I wake up expecting to find myself back in that studio apartment, worrying about whether I'd made a terrible mistake. Sarah took my hand and led me to the center of the dance floor. Without music, without an audience, we began to dance slowly in the moonlight streaming through the tall windows. It's real because you made it real, she whispered. Every difficult decision, every sleepless night, every moment when you wanted to give up but chose to keep going instead. This is what courage looks like, Marcus. This is what believing in yourself creates. As we swayed together in the empty ballroom, I thought about the letter from Morrison and Associates still sitting on my desk. Tomorrow I would write my response, declining their desperate offer not out of spite but out of commitment to the path I'd chosen. I'd built something better than they could ever offer, something that was truly mine. I thought about Rebecca's transformation, about second chances and the possibility of redemption even after years of cruelty. I thought about James discovering that security without joy was just another kind of prison. I thought about Detective Hernandez and the justice that sometimes comes in unexpected ways. But mostly I thought about the journey that had brought Sarah and me to this moment, dancing alone in our own ballroom, surrounded by the tangible evidence of dreams transformed into reality through hard work, determination, and unwavering faith in each other. The scared consultant was gone forever, replaced by a man who understood that true success wasn't about proving others wrong but about proving yourself right. It wasn't about accumulating wealth or status symbols but about building something meaningful that would outlast your own lifetime. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new chances to grow and contribute and make a difference. The tourism initiative would test my leadership abilities in ways I'd never experienced. The continued growth of the club would require new skills and strategies. The responsibility of being a community leader would demand wisdom and humility I was still developing. But tonight, none of that mattered. Tonight was about celebrating how far we'd come and acknowledging the courage it had taken to get here. As Sarah and I continued our slow dance in the empty ballroom, I knew with absolute certainty that whatever came next, we would face it together, stronger and more confident than ever before. The reunion had been a moment of vindication, but this quiet celebration of love and achievement and dreams fulfilled, this was the real victory. Not because I'd proven Rebecca wrong, but because I'd finally learned to trust the man Sarah had always believed I could become. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.